Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Speaker Stories. Today, I'm joined by Lesli Wood. Leslie is the Weimer Distinguished Chair and Professor of Geology and Geological Engineering at Colorado School of Mines. Leslie is also our April speaker, our April luncheon speaker. That's April 22nd, downtown Denver at the Wynkoop Brewery. You can learn more about that talk at rmssepm.org. And you can attend both in person and join us for lunch or attend online. But either way, you got to register. So check it out at rmssepm.org or check your email if you're a member. But be there on Earth Day. We're gonna have lunch and have a lot of fun, I think. But anyway, thanks so much, Leslie, for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I appreciate you managing time. I told Ben I'm sitting over in Italy these days. So I'm spending some time over here in Milan with a couple of companies and doing some touring around with a bunch of other companies in Kazakhstan and Scotland and stuff. So it's a great time to be engaged in online stuff because you can pretty much do an interview or do stuff from anywhere in the world if you can manage the time change. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm
yeah.
doing pretty good. It's a nice, busy end of the semester. We're trying to wrap up a lot of stuff at school and trying to get rolling for the summer. So I appreciate the opportunity to come down and visit with you guys when I get back on the 22nd. I it didn't even dawn on me it was Earth Day. I forgot about being Earth Day, April 22nd.
Yeah.
So I'm honored. I'm honored to be the Earth Day speaker. So.
Well, we're honored to have you. And again, thanks so much for carving some time out of your trip. It sounds like an awesome trip, and I know it's a busy time of year, so we'll just jump into it. So, why don't you tell us where you're from originally?
Yeah, so I was actually, believe it or not, I was born in the fault line in California. I was kind of born in Ventura, California, but my mom and dad moved back to Arkansas pretty shortly after that. So I was really raised in Arkansas on the farm in the Arkansas River Valley. If any
Oh,
of you know anything about Arkansas, it's the Arkansas River Valley is sort of the boundary between the Ozark Plateau and the Ouachita Mountain front, Paleozoic
okay.
Ouachita Mountain front. And so I was right there on the suture line of the river, and grew up there. Went to high school there. Went to the Little Log Kindergarten in Arkansas, and also elementary school and high school. And then I got my bachelor's at Arkansas Tech in Russellville, Arkansas, and then I
Okay.
ended up getting my master's at the University of Arkansas. So I was hanging around Arkansas for the first probably 24 years of my life,
Oh,
before
okay.
I moved to Colorado and to get a PhD. So.
Fantastic. So, and how did you get into geology? Was it kind of part of running around the farm in Arkansas, or?
I think, well, I had this propensity to paint rocks. I don't know. It's like I, I've always had an artistic streak in me. And I would go across the landscape, I'd pick up these rocks and I'd think that looks like a duck's head. And then I'd take it home. I was about 5 years old and I'd paint it, like a duck's head. And so I was always painting these rocks and stuff and picking them up and looking at them. And then when I was getting my undergraduate degree, I I figured out, I can't remember how I figured it out, but I figured out that right in the back of my backyard, on the edge of the lake, there was a storm deposit from the Paleozoic. It was like a hartshorn, sandstone, and there was this limonite sort of cemented bed, and it was full of trilobite pygidiums. It had like
Oh,
all these trilobite pygidiums and stuff in it. And so I remember I took a rope and I was hanging off the cliff and like pecking these trilobite pygidiums out of this thing. And I was doing, so that was sort of my undergraduate research project. So there was a lot of cool rocks to visit and a lot of things to run around on in the central Arkansas area, between the anticlines and between all the hartshorn sandstones and all the rocks in there. It was a really great place to grow up. My dad used to take us camping all the time, and we went backpacking in the Rocky Mountains, and we did a lot of camping in Arkansas. So I can remember he was very involved in the wild and scenic river designation of the buffalo.
Oh,
and he was very involved in the scenic river designations and stuff of a lot of areas in Arkansas. And so
okay.
um, we would camp along Richland Creek in Arkansas, and I would hunt for fossils, up in the up in the Ozark Plateau areas. You'd hunt for fossils up and down the creeks. So I was always kind of messing around and digging around
Yeah.
and rolling around in the mud and stuff in those areas. And I was a junior in high school. Arkansas Tech invited three people from the science area. So the science teacher in Dardanelle, Arkansas, home of the fighting sand lizards. Um, yeah, don't laugh, man. And there were three people that were designated. I was one of them to go over to Arkansas Tech and visit with the physical sciences department. And that's where I met a guy named Richard Cahoon, Dick Cahoon.
Okay.
He's just a great guy, and so I met him and Victor Veer, who was about a 5'2" northeastern New York paleontologist at trilobites, and he was like a big hobbit, or something. And so I met those guys, and I was sold. It was like Dick said, well, you can become a geologist and you can make a lot of money looking at rocks and running around and stuff. And so I graduated in 1981, which
Okay.
if any of you know, that was right before there was a massive crash in the oil and gas
All right.
industry. And so just about the time that I was getting into geology, everything was crashing off. And so I ended up going and getting my master's degree with Doy Zachary and Walt Manger and those guys at the University of Arkansas. And
Okay.
then I said, I'm gonna have to if I'm gonna do this, I'm either gonna go into a job in industry or I'm gonna get a PhD. And I decided if I was gonna get a PhD, I needed to change my location. I needed to go somewhere that would train. And so I literally took a map of the United States out and I put my finger on 10 different places that I'd want to live and I and I decided to look up the departments in those places, and so I did, and I sent letters to all those guys, and Frank Etheridge up at Fort Collins sent me a letter back and invited me up to visit. So I went up to visit with him, and he ended up admitting me to the program with Maria Henry, was also a master's student of his, and some other people around Denver. And that was my first foray into the Denver geologic community, which was just an amazing group of people.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up in geology and getting my education in geology. And it's been man 34 years ago or something. So it's been a good ride. I'm still on it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So, and then kind of going back, like, so there was a lot of paleontology in there. So is that
yeah.
kind of something that you worked on as an undergrad or as a graduate student? Were you working on paleontology? What were you?
I can't think of any geologist or undergraduate or that's not fascinated by paleontology. I mean, I took a bunch of geophysicists out, for a field trip a couple of years ago in the Jack Fort, you know, and paleontology, mineralogy, things like that. I mean, those guys, those three, people, they were crazy for quartz crystals. They were butt up like down in holes, like digging for quartz crystals like crazy. These were geophysicists, and I was just
Ah,
like, and
yeah.
so for myself, I grew up in an area where all I had to do was walk out my door and there were calamites, logs that were laying all over the place. And of course, so I was like, what's that about? And then, there were always in the Atoka, you could find all kinds of leaf fossils and trace fossils and stuff around. And then when I found this pygidium filled storm deposit, I was just like in hog heaven, I was just so I think Victor Veer had an influence on that too. He had gotten his PhD in trilobites and trilobite studies, and so I was fascinated with being able to go out and find animals that used to live, 350 million years ago. And so, like I said, I don't think there's anybody and especially youngsters that aren't just fascinated with the concepts of fossils because they're so tactile and they're
Yep.
so visual and they're so, I mean, a coral looks like a coral, you know? And it's like, and you can see this, and you can say, well, this lived 350 million years ago. And so geology is a unique science in that it's the only science that really gives us a sense of the depth of time beyond our own existence. You know, it's like I mean, beyond our own existence and passing our own existence, you
Yeah.
know, geology allows us to look at the earth in a way that no other science really allows you to do that. And that depth, that fathoming of the depth of time is a gift that we give to the world, that geologists give to the world, that cannot be gotten from any other science, really.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And when you understand the depth, or I guess the fraction of time that we exist in versus the depth of geologic time, that's the moment where it's, your mind
Yeah.
is awakened. And yeah, I agree
Yeah.
100%
I
on
mean,
that.
I don't mean to trivialize our existence, but I'm often saying, wow, we are just like a blip in the geologic time scale, and I remember Barack Obama made this comment one time about the transience of human existence, and he made some comment about we're just a blip in the history of time, and people were so upset about it, it's just like, why is he trivial? But I guess the reality is if you're able to fathom the depth of time that the earth has been in existence and where the earth is going, over the next, it's like we're not going to destroy the earth. I mean, the earth's going to be just fine, but we could alter where we live and how we live on the earth. And so we need to we need to think really hard about the decisions we make, because even though we're a blip in time, those 80 or 90 years can get to be really long if you're if you're frying under the sun, or something, so you can make your immediate, environment really, really difficult to live in if you're not careful. So
Yeah, 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 I agree. Um, so, and then after your PhD, did you go right into industry, or what did you do?
I did. I survived the John Dolson years. John was my recruiter. John Dolson is a well-known standard in the Rocky Mountain industry, and John was an alumnus of Colorado State and a Frank Etheridge student. And so he went into Amoco, and he worked for Amoco in Denver, and he was a recruiter for Denver out of the Denver office. And so whenever, even though there was quite a downturn in industry when I was graduating with my PhD in 1990, 91, 92, um, John made sure that Amoco to recruit at Fort Collins. And I had offers from two companies, Texaco in New Orleans and Amoco in Denver. And so I decided to stay with Amoco in Denver. And, lo and behold, before I could darken the door, they closed the office and moved everyone to Houston. So I suddenly became an Amoco Houston employee. And, uh, and so all these Denver people got shunted to Houston. And all my mentors, though, that I was looking forward to working with in Denver, were actually put into groups and stuff in Houston. And so I immediately went into an operations group at Amoco,
Okay.
and we were drilling wells in Pakistan.
Oh,
And
wow.
and I was told that it was an inappropriate place for me to go to Pakistan. And so I never actually got boots on the ground in
Okay.
Pakistan. But I remember the very first thing that I did was my boss said, go down and go to this meeting. It's with the vice president, and they're going to do a risk review of this Kahi well in Pakistan. And
Okay.
so I went down there and I sat through this review, and at the end of the review, there was a guy, the vice president, Scott Urban, said, am I to understand that there's 0% chance of reservoir in this opportunity? There's 0% chance of trap, and there's 0% chance of charge and migration, and there's 0%. He just went through these whole things. And I remember the guy that was presenting it said, well, no, no, Scott, actually there's a 2% chance for charge. what an opportunity. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, is this what the industry is about? It's like, so, so that was the first thing I did was I was working operations for these wells. It got quite more interesting after that because I moved into working with Trinidad and Tobago.
Oh,
And so
wow.
we had big exploration going on in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
But I was working with a bunch of Denver people. I was working with Maria Henry and Ken Ortman and people that had been in the Denver office, and they were really good. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed working with them a lot. So I worked in there, and then I moved in to the research group, kind of from that was working with the Tulsa Research Group, involved in sequence stratigraphy and seismic analysis and attribute analysis. Because
Okay.
Mike Bohoric, who was also a product of the Colorado industry, had developed this thing called coherency.
Ah,
And so he had developed coherency in order to identify channel architectures and edge detection and fault detection and stuff. And so they hired me on as about 4 years in, and they said, can we do something besides use this for structural interpretation? And so that's what got me into seismic geomorphology. And
oh, cool.
so I began to do seismic geomorphology with good data and bad data, mostly bad data, in Trinidad and those areas, and look for landscapes and paleo seascapes and stuff. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been doing that all of my career.
Yeah, fun.
And I've continued to work in Trinidad and Tobago. We have an enormous research project going on there now, looking
Oh,
at the ultra deep water areas of Trinidad and Tobago. And I've continued to have really good relationships with the Geological Society of Trinidad and Tobago as a member for forever. And so, it's built sort of career long or lifelong relationships with
yeah.
international collaborators and international friends and people. I've got friends here in Eni. We're going to go out to dinner tomorrow night. And so that's one of the things that's really been pleasurable to me in geology is that it's given me an opportunity to meet people around the world and to build friendships and relationships, both in the Denver community and then also in places like India and places like New Zealand and and those friendships sort of have lasted for a lifetime. So
That's really cool. Like, and that kind of threads into my next question about like, I mean, you've had a long career, and I'm sure you've navigated through some downturns even after you first started. And I can kind of guess where you might go with this, but how did you navigate through some of those more trying times in the industry?
yeah, I mean, industry has changed a lot, but I don't necessarily, there's some people that lament that industry's not what it used to be. It's like, ooh, we don't all have these big corner offices and we don't all, go to work 5 days a week and build these close relationships with people. And,
Yeah.
it's like the whole world changes like that. I mean, the way people interact, the way people communicate, the importance of energy is always going to be there. I mean, yeah, conventional oil and gas and going out and roughnecking on rigs and stuff is changing, but people are looking for new forms of energy. They're looking for hydrogen. They're looking for helium. They're looking for geothermal. And in geothermal, you get embedded into fracture analysis and you get embedded into rock mechanics and mechanical stratigraphy and things that are all important things for oil and gas energy and exploration, but now we need to turn them towards understanding geothermal systems and how to produce them. So things change, and you've one way to survive in a changing world is you have to be flexible and you have to be able to change with it if you want to stay in it. The same skill sets that set you up to be a good geologist set you up to do a lot of things in life. I think if you have an inquisitive mind, if you're able to abstract information together into what's critical information and what's not critical information, all of those types of skills are transferable to other industries and to other areas of study. But if you
Yeah.
want to stay in geology, you just need to be flexible and you need to be inquisitive enough to sit down and say, oh, what is this hydrogen thing about? How would you find hydrogen? Where would you go
Yeah.
looking for it? What's the type of data set you would use? It's like, um, And so if you're inquisitive about the earth and you're inquisitive about and you're dedicated to sort of providing the energy that society needs to be successful for the next, 20, 50 years, longer than that, then you can stay in the energy industry.
Yeah.
If you want to go looking for black oil, and if you want to go looking for coal, and things like that, then you can do that. It's just going to be a smaller pool area to play in. Um, and so I think one of the things that's kept me able to manage that and weather that is I always said that I decided to get a PhD not because I couldn't get a job in industry. I had job offers. I could have gotten a job in industry. But I decided to get a PhD because I never wanted to be in a position where I didn't have options. I always felt like I wanted to have options. There's probably some child psychologist could probably look at me and say I have some type of deficiency. But I was like, what's she trying to be? What is she scared of? It's like, no, I never wanted to be in a position where someone would say, you have to do this. And I was not comfortable saying, "No, I don't really wanna take that job," or, "I don't really wanna do that?"
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it doesn't mean I'm not a team player. I'm more than willing to do some things that aren't easy and aren't simple and aren't my favorite thing to do. But when it comes to your career, there's so many years that you spend working in a career, and it comes to the people that you work with and the amount of joy that you're having doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I decided I wanted a PhD because I might want to go teach sometime.
Yeah.
And I may stay in industry for 20, 30 years, but that wasn't the case with me. So I was glad I had a PhD that gave me the option to move out of industry and to go into academia and research.
Yeah.
So, because I moved to the Bureau of Economic Geology, um, back in 1997.
Okay.
And then I kept the same thing going when I was in the research position. I taught classes, I collaborated with Bill Galloway and Bill Fisher, and I did things that people may have looked at it and said, why is she doing that? She doesn't have to do that. But it was all about resume building. It was all about building options to position me to take an elite chair, named in the name of Bob Weimer, which I had a great respect for. I wouldn't even applied for it if it hadn't been Bob Weimer. So I think maintaining your skill sets so that you're as flexible as possible and getting the amount of education and training that you need to create options for what you want to do in life and not being afraid to do that.
Mm.
Um, then I think you can be successful in weather any kind of changes. There's always going to be change.
So adaptability, a natural curiosity, and being proactive.
Yeah.
Maybe I could sum that up. That's
Yeah, probably so. There's skill sets that a couple of years ago, I sat down and I gave a talk looking at what were the skills that my most successful and what I thought were my best graduate students. What were some of the skills that they had
really
that seemed to make them really successful? And one of them was just an innate natural curiosity that enabled them to set with a micro foraminiferal person
Mhm.
and listen to the foraminiferal person talk to them for an hour about the fauna that characterize, the Columbus Basin. And yeah, there's some things you're interested in there, and there's some things you're not.
Sure.
But you're able to listen to that person and make them feel like that's the most important thing that you're doing at that moment. And
Hmm.
then you're able to go over to the petrographer and talk about cement evolution, in sandstones or in carbonates or something. And
Yeah.
then you're able to go back to your office and abstract all those conversations into what are the salient pieces that are going to add value to what you're doing.
Yeah. Cool.
So it's an inane curiosity and an interest in almost everything,
Yeah.
but then an ability to pull back in and summarize those ideas into what are the most important points, right? That type of abstraction ability is very, very useful in students, as well as that type of enthusiasm for just about everything.
Yeah. That's really good. Good summary. Um, what keeps you fascinated in geology?
Um, I think the thing that fascinates me the most is it's probably weekly that I run into something that I know absolutely nothing about, you know? I mean, it's like I, for example, I get twisted off like I got into planetary geology and I teach planetary geology over at School of Mines. And now I've started teaching advanced planetary geology, which don't tell the provost, but I am not qualified to teach advanced planetary geology, but I'm doing the best I can. And so, um, I got into planetary geology because I was curious and interested, but I had a master student who came to me after our consortium meeting one time when I was in Austin. I was still down at the bureau, and he said, hey, because I'm always pushing my students to go out and get grants and apply for grants. I know because some of them have won grants from RMS-SEPM and other people here. And so I really appreciate that. But I'm always encouraging them to go out and build their resume and because there's a certain amount of personal satisfaction that comes from writing a proposal and getting a proposal funded, for yourself. And so he had gone out and he said, hey, I got a grant from an organization in the UK to study mud volcanoes on Mars. And I was like, really? So immediately my mind's thinking, wow, how does that happen? Like, how do you use $500, to study mud volcanoes on Mars? Um, but it was a bit of a lull time. And so I thought, geez, I wonder what Mars looks like these days. And so I decided to get online and I started pulling up these images of Mars. And and all of a sudden this delta came up and
Ah,
and I was like, "Oh, there's a delta." And then nobody I started reading the few papers that were on it,
yeah,
Mallon and Edgett, people like that, and nobody would say it was a delta. And it began to drive me insane. I was like, why won't anybody say this is a delta? It looks like a delta and it
yeah,
walks and quacks like a delta. So it must be a delta. And so that's kind of how I got into Mars study. I began to sort of look at how could I prove this is a delta, and how could I
cool.
show people that this is delta? And so that kind of got me into Mars, and that launched off in a whole different direction of research and
Yeah,
collaborations. And I mean, I began to talk to John Grotzinger about the work that he was doing on the Mars rovers, and he came to Colorado School of Mines and gave a talk, and so those type of things where you step into areas that you know nothing about, and all of a sudden it becomes a real intangible thing. That's what interests me. I did the same thing a few years ago with the Cretaceous in northern South America. I was like, why have I never looked at the Cretaceous? I'm always in the tertiary, It's like,
yeah,
why have I never looked at the Cretaceous in northern South America? All of a sudden, the Liza discovery is being found, and all these discoveries in the late Cretaceous in northern South America. I'm like, wonder what that looks like. And so a couple of years ago, I dove into that, and that turned into a whole different direction. So I think, and did the same thing with carbonates recently. I'm like, I am not a carbonate person. I'm like, I'm a siliciclastic person. And so I dove into like carbonates. I'm like, God, these are interesting, but why do they have to have a whole different like terminology, wax stones, pack stones, right? It's like, it's ridiculous. So I'm kind of involved in that now, getting into arguments with Rick Sarg and other people about carbonates and carbonate mass failures and stuff.
yeah,
So
good.
I think the thing that keeps me interested is I continually run into subjects and topics that I know nothing about. And so if I were smart, I would just turn around and walk the other way. But oftentimes it's too intriguing to turn around and walk the other way. And
Yeah,
so I end up getting involved in those things and realizing there's whole areas of the earth and science and stuff out there that I know nothing about. So I'm sure I'll always, and that's part of, like I said, what I think makes people successful in geology is maintaining that curiosity and
yep.
that interest in sort of learning about new things and new ideas and stuff. So
Okay. That's great. Do you have a favorite outcrop or mineral or fossil or anything top of mind on
do I have a favorite outcrop or mineral or fossil? Um, I don't think I have a favorite. I tell you what, I'm a big quartz person because I have a lot of quartz, I have some big quartz pieces in my house
Okay.
because I'm from Arkansas. And so Arkansas is known for its quartz.
Okay.
So most recently, I figured out there's something called Lemurian quartz,
Hmm.
and it's based. We don't even need to get this. It's based on this concept that there was like an Atlantis that was in the Pacific called the island of Lemuria,
Oh,
and
cool.
the idea is that the striations that you see on the quartz crystals
Uh-huh.
are actually a secret language of Lemuria.
Okay.
And that if you can read these quartz crystals, you can read like the secret language of these highly advanced people in Lemuria. And so, see, so that's a whole different area I know nothing about, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, but stuff like that. So I have these big quartz crystal pieces in my house, and apparently there's some kind of secret ancient language that I
You just
just
got to
had no
decode it.
idea about.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need a
So
Rosetta Stone for that. There you go. That's
I know, I know. So
cool. Okay. And then what do you do for fun when you're not touring the world and
well, when I'm touring the world, I usually try to link it with something fun,
okay.
like we went sailing in Australia last year, the Whit Sundays, and then we went sailing in Sicily as part of a trip over here to visit Annie stuff. So we sail in various places, and then we golf in various places. But
Cool.
I also play music, and most people know that I play music. And I have a band. Had a band in Austin, and I have a band here. Some of you may know Dallas Spears, and he's an awesome guitar player, just unbelievably good. But retired out of the energy industry. And
Yeah.
my bass player is the professor Gabe Walton that's down in the department. And then so we played the Creed Music Festival last year. We really enjoyed that. I'm hoping to have more time to record a third album. I have two albums out, and I'm a singer. I'm a songwriter, really. I write a lot of songs and play a lot of music. We always play at the AAPG image meeting and various functions around. So
Cool.
I'll be playing this summer at a few geo functions that are happening around.
Great.
So yeah.
What's the name of your group?
Well, it's usually Leslie Wood and the Spice Boys, but but my it was Leslie Wood and the Spice Boys in Austin, and so it kind of translated here to Leslie Wood and the Spice Boys. But but if it's just myself and Gabe, we'd usually go as Walton and Wood
Uh-huh.
because I told Gabe he was the shorter of the two of us, so he should be in the front name of the group. So, so I'm
Yeah.
not big on, I'm not very good at names. We probably need
Okay.
another name, and I've thought about other names, but I'm like, or the Ore Blasters or something is too cliche, and so I don't know. I may end up, just playing solo around. So, and then I would just go as Leslie Wood. So.
Okay. Well, I'm a bass player, so if you ever need,
Oh, are you really?
um,
Do you play electric bass or stand up?
I'm not a stand-up. I'm an electric bass guy.
Yes, because Gabe plays stand up bass,
Oh, that's
and
so
I
cool.
love stand up bass. But when you're playing parties, you need an electric bass player.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm missing my bass player passed away this summer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And as a lot of good bass players do. So, as long as you're healthy and you're standing upright, then you may get the job.
Okay. All right.
So
Yeah.
it's not big and demanding. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll talk about the pay.
yeah, we'll do that. And
We negotiate.
the first band I ever played with was a group out of Amico, with John Dolson played banjo, but hopefully, people didn't hold that against us. But and we played bluegrass, and the name of the group was Oilfield Grass.
Ah,
And our motto was, you get what you pay for, we play for free. So
love it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it
I
was
had a
good
group
times.
and a group with a bunch of new hires from Anadarko, and we called ourselves Gutter Cast, and it was
Oh, that's great.
pretty good. Pretty good.
Are you still playing?
Oh yeah, yeah, I do.
Are
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Hmm.
Are you
Yeah.
you're still playing with the gutter cast?
No, no,
Oh,
that was a Houston thing, and yeah,
oh, okay.
that fizzled
Yeah,
out.
we'll have to get together because I do need an electric bass player for, I mean, I like playing just two of us, like Gabe and myself.
Yeah.
We'll play a lot of my stuff and we'll play some good stuff. But when you're playing a party and they really want a drummer, lead guitar, bass, and me, then you
Yeah.
really need an electric bass.
Yeah, you
So
got to cut through. Yeah.
yeah, you gotta come through. So
Cool. All right. Well, let's finish up with can
okay.
you give us a preview of your talk on April 22nd on Earth Day?
Yeah, so I've studied shelf systems pretty much all my career. And I've gone all the way from studying them in outcrop to studying them sort of in modern systems. And more recently, well, not too recently, but when I was at my last few years at the University of Texas, we did a bunch of physical models on looking at combined flow on shelf systems. It's like what happens whenever you combine gravity flows that are happening in shelf systems with wave processes, storm and wave processes.
Okay.
And we were looking to apply that understanding to things in the San Juan Basin, to things in the rocks out in Oregon, to Cretaceous age rocks and systems. And
Okay.
so that really got me interested in wondering and trying to understand, why are there so many hummocky cross stratified beds in the Cretaceous? Because
Hmm.
hummocky cross stratified beds are basically the shelf out of equilibrium. It's a storm deposit, right?
Yeah.
And you can actually use these hummocks to back calculate the size of the waves and the size of storms. And so that led me into some trying to understand the size of storms in the super greenhouse time periods of the Cretaceous. And they were pretty amazing, you know. And
Okay.
so I think that it's been an interesting transition to sort of look at that ancient system. Like I said, to come full circle, is that geology offers you that lens through which you can view deep time and apply those learnings to modern systems and future systems. And so that's kind of what the shelf studies, I think, have done. And understanding of the shelf systems is, we're looking at the ancient super greenhouse events in the shelf system in the Western interior and other parts of the world. And then we're taking that information and say, hey, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you do warm the ocean up this amount, this is kind of what could happen, right? And so we're kind of using that to begin to predict a lot of geohazards and things that could happen as we transition into higher frequency and higher intensity of hurricanes and storms and things. So yeah, I've been really interested and I like talking. I've been interested in talking about these shelf systems that we studied in the Cretaceous and what the implications are for paleoclimate and what the paleoclimate implications are for sort of future climate forecasting and stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Well, really looking forward to it. And again, thanks so much. I really, really appreciate our conversation today and taking the time. This is
Sure.
great. And yeah, again, for our audience, please register on rmssepm.org. April 22nd is the date. We started at about 11:30. Talk starts about noon. You can join online and anywhere in the world, even if you're in
Yeah.
if you're in Milan, come and find us. But yeah, Leslie, thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your trip, and we'll see
Thanks.
you soon.
All right. I'll see you guys as soon as I get back. I get back on the 20th. I'll see you on the 22nd. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully you're not
All
too
right.
jet lagged.
No, awesome. We'll talk to you later. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.